أعلن افتتاح جلسة مجلس الأمن 8991.
meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
جدول الأعمال المؤقت
The
لهذه
provisional
الجلسة هو
agenda for this
الأخطار
meeting
التي
is
تهدد
threats
السلام
to
والأمن
international
الدوليين.
peace and security.
أقر جدول
The
الأعمال
agenda is adopted.
وفقا للمادة
In
37 من
accordance with
النظام
Rule
الداخلي المؤقت
37
للمجلس
of the
أدعو
Council's
ممثل
Provisional Rules of
أوكرانيا إلى
Procedure,
المشاركة
I
في
invite
هذه
the
الجلسة.
representative of the Ukraine to participate in
تقرر
this
ذلك.
meeting. It is so decided.
وفقا للمادة
In
39
accordance
من
with Rule
النظام الداخلي
39 of the
المؤقت
Council's
للمجلس أدعو
Provisional Rules of
مقدمتي
Procedure, I invite the following briefers
التاليتين
to
إلى
participate
المشاركة
in
في
this
هذه
meeting.
الجلسة. السيدة
Ms.
روزماري
Rosemary
دي كارلو
DiCarlo,
وكيلة الأمين العام
Undersecretary
للشؤون
General
السياسية
for
وبناء
Political
السلام،
and Peace-Building Affairs,
والسيدة
and
إيزومي
Ms. Izumi
ناكاميتسو
Nakamitsu,
الممثلة
High
السامية لشؤون
Representative
نزع
for
السلاح.
Disarmament Affairs.
تقرر ذلك.
It is so decided.
يبدأ مجلس الأمن
The
الآن نظره
Security
في
Council
البند
will
2
now
من
begin
جدول
its
الأعمال.
consideration of Item 2 of the agenda.
أعطي الكلمة الآن
I now give
للسيدة
the floor
روزماري دي كارلو.
to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Madam President, the war in Ukraine is now in its third week. Fighting continues unabated. The Russian armed forces are pursuing their offensive operations and laying siege to several cities in the south, east, and north of the country. A large concentration of Russian forces is reportedly massed along several approaches to the capital, Kyiv. The situation is particularly alarming in Mariupol, Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv, where there is shelling of residential areas and civilian infrastructure, resulting in an increasing number of civilians killed and injured. The utter devastation being visited on these cities is horrific. The numbers bear out the conclusion that civilians are paying the highest price for the conflict. As of 11 March, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has recorded a total of 1,546 civilian casualties, including 564 killed and 982 injured since the start of the invasion on 24 February. OHCHR believes the real casualty figures are likely considerably higher, as information from locations whose intense hostilities are ongoing has been delayed, and reports are still pending corroboration. Most of the recorded civilian casualties, which include children, have been caused by explosive weapons with a wide impact area, including heavy artillery and multi-launch rocket systems and missile and airstrikes. OHCHR has received credible reports of Russian forces using cluster munitions, including in populated areas. Indiscriminate attacks, including those using cluster munitions, which are of a nature to strike military objectives and civilians or civilian objects without distinction, are prohibited under international humanitarian law. Direct attacks against civilians and civilian objects, as well as so-called area bombardment in towns and villages, are also prohibited under international law and may amount to war crimes. As of 10 March, the World Health Organization has verified 26 attacks on health facilities, health workers, and ambulances, causing 12 deaths and 34 injuries. This includes the bombing of the Mariupol Maternity Hospital on 9 March. We condemn such attacks without reservation. They cause not only death and destruction, they also deprive people of urgently needed care and endanger more lives. We cannot emphasize it enough. The targeting of civilians, of residential buildings, hospitals, schools, kindergartens is inexcusable and intolerable. All alleged violations of international human law must be investigated and those found responsible held accountable. Madam President, millions of people in Ukraine need urgent assistance. This includes 2 million internally displaced people. We are scaling up humanitarian aid in areas where security permits. More than 500,000 people are now receiving assistance, including life-saving food, shelter, blankets, and medical supplies. The United Nations and our partners have developed operational plans to meet humanitarian needs where they are most acute. This work needs funding. Over $1.5 billion was pledged to the appeals last week. We are grateful for this generosity and encourage donors to release the funding quickly. Madam President, it is critical to urgently achieve a cessation of hostilities, to allow for the safe passage of civilians from besieged areas, and to ensure that life-saving humanitarian supplies can reach those who remain. On 9 March, over 51,000 people were reportedly evacuated through 5 out of 6 agreed-upon safe passages. These safe passages must continue. They should be implemented with clear principles and modalities. Civilians should be duly and timely informed of the possibility to leave the concerned areas and on a voluntary basis and in the direction they choose. To expand life-saving assistance and services to those most in need, humanitarian actors must also have safe, rapid, unimpeded, and sustained access to all areas. We commend the humanitarian actors on the ground who are staying and delivering in a highly volatile situation. Madam President, the number of refugees from Ukraine has reached 2.5 million people. These numbers continue increasing by the day. We also commend the countries that have kept their borders open to welcome and support refugees. All people fleeing Ukraine, including third country nationals, need access to safety and protection in line with the principle of non-refoulement and without any form of discrimination. Madam President, the need for negotiations to stop the war in Ukraine could not be more urgent. We note the 3 rounds of talks held thus far between Ukrainian and Russian delegations. We call for such efforts to intensify, including to further secure humanitarian and ceasefire arrangements as a matter of priority. We urge the sides to build on their contacts, such as the meeting yesterday between the foreign ministers of Ukraine and the Russian Federation in Antalya, Turkey. The logic of dialogue and diplomacy must prevail over the logic of war. The Secretary General is grateful to the many member states working in pursuit of a diplomatic solution to this dangerous conflict. He is in regular contact with regional and other leaders, and his good offices remain available. Madam President, let me affirm the U.S. commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. As the war grinds on, there's already much reflection about its implications beyond the tragedy it represents for Ukraine. We increasingly hear the use of terms such as turning point, defining moment, end of multilateralism. I believe this is not an exaggeration. Indeed, some consequences are already being felt economically and politically. Perhaps most alarming are the risks the violence poses to the global framework for peace and security. We must do everything we can to find a solution and put an end to this war. And we must do it now. Thank you, Madam President.
أشكر السيدة دي كارلو على
I thank
إحاطتها. أعطي الكلمة
Ms.
الآن
DiCarlo for her
للسيدة
briefing.
إيزومي
I now give the
ناكاميتسو.
floor to Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, I thank Council members for the opportunity to brief you this morning. I am aware of reports that certain public health facilities are in areas impacted by armed conflict, putting the safety of those facilities at risk. I appeal to all parties in this conflict to ensure the safety of all such facilities in Ukraine. I am aware of media reports regarding allegations of biological weapons programs. The United Nations is not aware of any biological weapons programs. That is largely thanks to the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, which prohibits the development, production, acquisition, transfer, stockpiling, and use of biological and toxic weapons. the Russian Federation and Ukraine are both states parties to the Convention. In addition, the Russian Federation is a depository government under the Convention. All states parties to the Convention have undertaken never in any circumstances to develop, produce, stockpile, or otherwise acquire or retain biological weapons. Biological weapons have been outlawed since the BWC entered into force in 1975. A total of 183 states have now joined the Convention, and biological weapons are universally seen as being abhorrent and illegitimate. The BWC lacks a multilateral verification mechanism overseen by an independent organization, such as the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Therefore, assessing compliance with its obligations is a task for its states parties. Madam President, despite the lack of an international verification regime, the Biological Weapons Convention does, however, contain several measures to which concerned states parties can have recourse in order to address situations in which states parties have concerns or suspicions about the activities of their peers. For example, Article 5 of the Convention states that, and I quote, "The states parties to this convention undertake to consult one another and to cooperate in solving any problems which may arise in relation to the objective of or in the application of the provisions of this convention." End of quote. Within the framework of Article 5, states parties have established an annual exchange of information based upon the submission of confidence-building measures. States parties must declare information about relevant facilities and activities on their territory in order to prevent or reduce the occurrence of ambiguous doubts and suspicions between them. The Russian Federation and Ukraine both participate annually in the confidence-building measures. The annual reports submitted by the Russian Federation and Ukraine are available to all BWC states parties for the purposes of transparency and reassurance. In addition, and also within the framework of Article 5 of the Convention, states parties have developed procedures for clarifying ambiguous and unresolved matters, including the possible convening of a formal consultative meeting to consider such matters. Article 6 of the Convention states that, and I quote, "Any state party to this Convention which finds that any other state party is acting in breach of obligations deriving from the provisions of the Convention may lodge a complaint with the Security Council. If agreed by the Security Council, an investigation on the basis of the complaint received could be initiated. Article 6 of the Convention has never been activated." While these provisions have not been regularly used, they are nonetheless internationally agreed procedures that are available to be used to diffuse tensions and to address and resolve any concerns relating to compliance with obligations under the BWC in a multilateral setting. I would therefore encourage BWC states parties to consider making use of the available procedures for consultation and cooperation in order to resolve these issues. Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, situations such as this demonstrate the need to strengthen the BWC, to operationalize it, and to institutionalize it. I would therefore like to take this opportunity to encourage its states parties to come to the Convention's 9th Review Conference, scheduled to take place in Geneva later in 2022, committed to a series of overhaul of the Convention to ensure it is properly equipped and resourced to deal with the challenges ahead. Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, to conclude my statement, I would like to take this opportunity to address the worrying issue of the safety and security of nuclear power plants in Ukraine. An accident involving nuclear facilities in Ukraine could have severe consequences for public health and environment, and all steps must be taken to avoid it. The possibility of an accident caused by failure to a reactor's power supply or the inability to provide regular maintenance is growing by the day. The forces in effective control of nuclear power plants in Ukraine must ensure their safe and secure operation. I am extremely concerned that 4 of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA's, 7 pillars of the safe and secure operations of facilities are reportedly not being implemented at Chernobyl and Zaporizhzhia. Communications must be fully restored, and operating staff must be allowed to properly carry out their duties and to do so free of undue pressure. I would like to echo the Secretary General's support for IAEA Director General Grossi's efforts to develop a framework to ensure the safety and security of Ukraine's facilities, and welcome the constructive meetings he held in Turkey on 10th of March with the foreign ministers of Ukraine and the Russian Federation. I thank you very much for your attention.
أشكر السيدة ناكاميتسو على إحاطتها.
Ms. Nakamitsu for her briefing.
لأعضاء المجلس
I now give the
الراغبين
floor
في
to those
الإدلاء
council
ببيانات.
members who wish to make
أعطي الكلمة
statements.
لممثل
I give the floor
الاتحاد
to the
الروسي.
representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель,
Madam President,
уважаемые коллеги,
distinguished colleagues,
пандемия коронавируса
coronavirus pandemic,
COVID-19
COVID-19
показала,
pandemic
насколько
has
уязвимо
shown us
человечество
how
перед лицом
vulnerable
биологических угроз.
humankind is when facing biological threats.
Она уже
It
унесла
has
и
already
продолжает
taken and
уносить колоссальное
continues
количество
taking
человеческой
a
жизни.
huge number of human lives.
С вступлением в силу в 1975 году Конвенции о запрете биологического и токсинного оружия появилась надежда, что миру удалось избавиться, по крайней мере, от тех биологических угроз, которые созданы руками людей. Так как все подписавшие ее страны осознают чудовищные риски, которые несет в себе использование биологического оружия, и отказались от планов по его разработке. К сожалению, у нас есть основания полагать, что эти надежды не сбылись в полной мере. Мы созвали сегодняшнее заседание, поскольку в ходе проведения России специальной военной операции на Украине вскрылись поистине шокирующие факты экстренной зачистки киевским режимом следов военно-биологической программы, реализуемой Киевом при поддержке Минобороны США. В распоряжении российского Минобороны оказались документы, которые подтверждают, что на территории Украины формировалась сеть из, по крайней мере, 30 биологических лабораторий, в которых проводятся крайне опасные биологические эксперименты, нацеленные на усиление патогенных свойств чумы, сибирской язвы, тулеремии, холеры и других смертельных болезней с использованием синтетической биологии. Эта работа ведется при финансировании и непосредственном кураторстве Управления Министерства обороны США по снижению военной угрозы, в том числе в интересах Национального центра медицинской разведки Минобороны США. Ключевую роль в осуществлении данных программ играла центральная референс-лаборатория с уровнем биозащиты BSL-3 на базе Украинского научно-исследовательского противочумного института имени Мечникова в Одессе. Активную часть играли исследовательские центры в других городах Украины – Киеве, Львове, Харькове, Днепре, Херсоне, Тернополе, Ужгороде, Виннице. Результаты
The results
исследований
of this
направлялись в
work were
военно-биологические
being
центры
sent to
США, в
military
том
biological
числе
centers in the
в
United States,
научно-исследовательский
including
медицинский
into
институт
the U.S.
инфекционных
Army
заболеваний,
Medical Research Institute of Infectious
научно-исследовательский
Diseases,
институт имени
into
Уолтера
the
Рида,
Walter Reed Army Institute of
Центр
Research, into
медицинских
the
исследований
Naval
ВМС
Medical
США,
Research
а
of the
также в
U.S.
военные
Navy,
лаборатории
and
Форт
into the
Детрик,
U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories in Fort
которые
Detrick,
ранее являлись
which
ключевыми
used to
объектами
be
американской программы
being
создания
key
биологического оружия.
facilities of the American program to develop biological
Все
weapons.
материалы доступны
All
на
of these
веб-сайте нашего
materials are
Минобороны,
available on
и
the
оно
website of
озвучивает
our
их в
Ministry
ходе
of Defense, and
ежедневных
our
брифингов.
Ministry of Defense is describing them in the course of their daily
Я остановлюсь
briefings.
на
Let
наиболее
me
ярких
just
примерах.
dwell on the more salient examples.
Нашим военным стали
Our
известны
military
подробности
became
проекта
aware of the details
UP-4,
of the project
который
UP4,
реализовывался в
which was
лабораториях
being
Киева,
conducted in
Харькова и Одессы.
laboratories of Kiev, Kharkov, and
Его
Odessa.
целью является
The
изучение
goal is
возможности
to study the
распространения особо
possibility
опасных
of
инфекций
spreading particularly
через
dangerous
мигрирующих
infections
птиц,
using migratory
в
birds.
том числе
And this includes
высокопатогенного
the highly
гриппа
pathogenic influenza
H5N1,
H5N1,
летальность которого для
whose
людей достигает
lethality for
50%,
people
а
reaches
также болезнь
50%,
Ньюкасла.
as well as in the Newcastle disease.
В рамках еще одного
There was
проекта в
another
качестве
project
переносчика
where the vector of
потенциальных
the
агентов
potential
биологического
agents of
оружия
biological weapon,
рассматривались летучие мыши.
bats were considered.
Среди приоритетных
Amongst
направлений для
priority
изучения
areas
фигурируют
for
бактериальные и
study,
вирусные
they
патогены,
include the bacterial and
которые
viral
могут передаваться от
pathogens that
летучих
could
мышей к
spread
человеку.
from bats to people,
Чума,
such as
лептоспироз,
plague,
а также
leptospirosis,
филовирусы и
and as well as
коронавирусы.
filoviruses and
Как
coronaviruses.
вытекает из проектных
As
документов,
can
США
see from the
активно
project
финансировали
documents, the
биологические
United
проекты
States
на
actively
Украине.
funded the biological projects in
Велись
Ukraine.
эксперименты по
Experiments
изучению
were being
переноса
conducted
опасных
to study the
заболеваний
spread of dangerous
эктопаразитами,
diseases
вшами и
using
блохами.
ectoparasites such as lice and fleas.
Даже не специалистам
Even
понятно, что такие
non-specialists
эксперименты
understand that
одни из
such
самых
experiments
безрассудных,
are
так
one
как
of
они
the
не
more
дают
reckless
возможности
because
контролировать
they do
дальнейшее
not give you an
развитие
opportunity
ситуации.
to control how the situation is going to
Аналогичные
develop
исследования с
further.
использованием блох и
Similar
вшей как
studies
агентов для
using
оружия
lice and
проводились
fleas
в
as
40-е годы
agents were
печально
conducted in the
известным отрядом
1940s by the
731
infamous
японской армии,
Squad 731 of the
члены
Japanese
которого, к
army,
слову,
whose
нашли
members, by
прибежище
the
в
way,
США и
found
избежали
refuge
правосудия.
in the United States and escaped justice.
Украина обладает уникальным
Ukraine
географическим
has a
положением, где
unique
пересекаются
geographical
целый ряд
location,
миграционных путей
a whole
потенциальных переносчиков
number
опасных
of
заболеваний,
migratory routes
многие из
cross there
которых
for potential
пролегают через
spreaders of
территорию
disease,
России
and
и
many of
Восточной
them
Европы.
go through Russia and Eastern Europe.
Упомянутые мной
The
исследования
research I just mentioned
проводились в самом центре
was
Восточной
conducted at the
Европы
very
и в
heart of
непосредственной
Eastern
близости от
Europe
границ
and
России.
in immediate proximity of the Russian border.
Как свидетельствуют полученные
As
данные,
the
птиц,
data we received shows
окольцованных и
us, the
выпущенных в ходе
birds which were
биоисследований
ringed and
из Херсонского
released
заповедника
as a
отловили
result of
в Ивановской и
bio-research
Воронежской
in
областях
Kherson Zoo, they were caught in
Российской Федерации.
Ivanovo and Voronezh Oblast of the Russian Federation
Анализ
later.
материалов
And the
подтверждает
analysis
факт
of the
передачи
materials
из
shows
биолаборатории
that
в
there was a
Харьков за рубеж более
transfer
140
from
контейнеров
biolaboratory in
с
Kharkov
эктопаразитами
abroad
летучих
of
мышей.
about 140 containers
Мы
with
не знаем, какова
ectoparasites
дальнейшая
of
судьба
bats, and
этих
we do
опасных
not know
биоматериалов
what was the
и
further
каковы будут
fate of these
последствия того,
dangerous
что они безо
materials,
всякого
and what
международного
a
контроля
consequence is going to be of the
растворятся,
fact that there was
и
no
не
international
исключено, что на
control
просторах Европы.
there, and they will just simply dissolve quite probably over Europe.
В любом случае,
In any
высокий
event,
риск
there is a very
исхищения для
high risk that they will
использования в
be
террористических
stolen
целях
and
или
used
для
for
продажи на
terrorist
черном рынке.
purposes or that they will be sold on the black market.
Под предлогом испытаний средств лечения
Using
и
the
профилактики коронавирусной
pretext
инфекции
of
из Украины
curing for
в научно-исследовательский
coronavirus,
институт имени
from
Уолтера Рида
Ukraine
сухопутных
into
войск
the
США
Walter Reed Institute in the United
вывезено несколько
States,
тысяч образцов
several
сыворотки больных,
thousand samples of
большинство из которых
blood
относятся к славянскому
serum
этносу.
of the people was taken, and most of them are of Slavic extraction.
Всем известно, с какой
Everyone
щепетильностью на
knows how
Западе относятся к
careful
передаче
people in
за
the West
границу
are when it
биоматериалов
comes to
граждан западных
transferring
стран. И
biomaterials
неспроста,
of
ведь в
Western
теории могут
nationals
быть созданы биоагенты,
abroad. And
способные
there is reason
избирательно
for
поражать
that, because
различные
in
этнические
theory,
группы.
bioagents can be created which can selectively target specific ethnic groups.
При этом деятельность
At the
биологических
same time, the
лабораторий,
activity
активность
of
которых мы
biological
отмечаем с
laboratories,
2014
who
года,
we
и
notice have been
реализуемая
active since
Соединенными Штатами
2014,
программа
and
так называемого
what is being
реформирования
implemented by
украинской
the
системы
United States
здравоохранения
within the program of
привели
so-called
к неуправляемому росту
reform
заболеваемости на Украине
of
особо
Ukrainian
опасными и
healthcare
экономически
led
значимыми
to
инфекциями.
a uncontrolled growth in Ukraine when it comes to particularly dangerous and economically important infections.
Фиксируется рост числа случаев
There is a
краснухи,
growing number
дифтерии,
of German measles
туберкулеза.
cases, diphtheria and tuberculosis.
Заболеваемость корью увеличилась более
Cases
чем
of
100 раз.
measles went up by a factor of more than 100.
Всемирная организация
World Health
здравоохранения объявила
Organization
Украину страной
declared
с высоким
Ukraine
риском
a
вспышки
country
полиомиелита.
with a high risk of an outbreak of
Есть
poliomyelitis.
свидетельства и о том,
There's
что в
also
Харькове, где
evidence to
находится
show
одна из
that in
таких
Kharkov,
лабораторий,
where
в
one
январе
of such laboratories is
2016
located,
года
in
от
January
свиного гриппа умерли
2016,
20
20
украинских
Ukrainian
солдат.
soldiers died from
Еще
the
200
swine
были
flu,
госпитализированы.
and 200 more were hospitalized.
К марту того
By
же года
March
на
of the
Украине от
same
свиного гриппа
year,
умерли уже
in
364
Ukraine,
человека.
364 people already died from
Регулярными на
swine
Украине
flu.
стали вспышки
The
африканской чумы
outbreak of
свиней.
African swine fever in Ukraine have become a
В
regular occurrence. In
2019 году была зафиксирована
2019,
вспышка
there was
болезни
an
по симптомам схожей
outbreak
с
of a
чумой.
disease which symptomatically is very close to plague.
В то время как
At the
военно-биологические
time when
исследования
the
на
military
территории самих США были
biological
свернуты из-за
studies
опасности
in
для
the
американского
United States
населения, киевские власти, по сути, дали добро
removed because of danger
на
to the
превращение
people.
своей
The
страны
Kiev
в
authorities
испытательный
basically
полигон
agreed
и
to
использование
make
жителей
their
Украины в
country
качестве
into an
потенциальных
experimental
подопытных.
platform and using their citizens as guinea
Эти
pigs.
эксперименты
These
с потенциальным
experiments with a
риском в
potential
масштабах страны
risk for
продолжались
the
годами.
entire country is something that went on
Видим в
for
этом еще одно
years. And
подтверждение
we can see in
чудовищного
this
цинизма
yet another
западных кураторов
confirmation
Киева,
of an
которые
extraordinary
на всех углах
cynicism
трубят о том, что
of
как их заботит судьба
Kiev's
украинского народа.
mentors who tell us all the time that they're very concerned by the fate of the Ukrainian
Если
people.
верить данным агентства Reuters,
If we are
то
to believe
Всемирная
what is being
организация
said by
здравоохранения
Reuters, and
рекомендовала
the
Украине
WHO
уничтожить
recommended that
имеющиеся
Ukraine
особо
should
опасные патогены во
eliminate
избежание
the
утечек, которые
particularly
могут привести
dangerous
к
pathogens, they have to make
распространению
sure
болезней
that
среди
they avoid
населения.
leaks. Otherwise, this could lead to the
Выполнил
spread
ли
of
эту рекомендацию
diseases
Киев,
amongst the
неизвестно.
population. And we don't know whether Kiev implemented that
И
recommendation.
имеющиеся в распоряжении нашего
The
Минобороны
Ministry of
материалы подтверждают,
Defense
что
of
все
ours
серьезные
has
исследования
materials
повышенной
stating
опасности
that all
в
of the
биолабораториях
serious
Украины
studies
проводились
of
под непосредственным
high
руководством
level of
специалистов
danger
из США,
in biological laboratories
которые
in
обладали
Ukraine were
дипломатическим
conducted
иммунитетом.
under the leadership of specialists of the United States who had diplomatic immunity.
Сейчас, по данным нашего
Currently,
Минобороны, киевский
according to our
режим по
Ministry of
требованию
Defense, the
западных
Kiev
кураторов
regime,
спешно заметает
according to
следы,
the request of their
чтобы к
Western
российской
mentors,
стороне
are
не
trying
попали
to clean it
прямые
all up
свидетельства
to make
нарушения
sure that
США
the
и
Russian side does
Украины
not
в статье
find
1
direct
КБТУ.
evidence that the United States and Ukraine are violating Article 1 of Biological and Toxin
Происходит
Weapons
экстренное
Convention.
сворачивание биологических программ.
Their biological programs are
Министерство
being
здравоохранения Украины
urgently
поставило задачу с 24 февраля
closed up, and the
полностью
Ministry of
уничтожить
Health of
биоагенты,
Ukraine set as a
находящиеся в
goal
лабораториях.
to, as of the 24th of
При
February,
этом анализ инструкций
fully
должностным лицам
destroy
лабораторий
the
свидетельствует о
bioagents in
том, что порядок
laboratories.
ликвидации
The
коллекций направлен
analysis of
на их безвозвратное
instructions in
уничтожение.
laboratories tells us that
Анализ
the
актов
order of
уничтожения
liquidations is
показывает,
aimed
что
at their
только во Львове было
irretrievable elimination.
уничтожено 232
Our analysis
емкости
shows
с
that in
возбудителем
Lviv alone,
лептоспироза,
233
30
containers
с
with
10
leptospirosis
с
agents
бруцеллезом,
were destroyed,
5
30
с
with
чумой.
tularemia,
Всего
10 with
более
brucellosis,
320
5 with
емкостей.
plague. Overall, 320
Номенклатура и
containers.
избыточное
The
количество патогенов
nomenclature
дают
and the
основание полагать,
excessive
что работы
number
проводились
of
в рамках
biopathogens
военно-биологических
leads
программ.
us to believe that these work were conducted within the framework of a military biological
Хотел бы
program.
отдельно обратиться к коллегам
I
из
would like to
Европы.
address my colleagues from
Под
Europe
боком
separately.
Евросоюза все эти годы
Right next to
существовал
the
полигон
European
для крайне
Union,
опасных
you've had
биологических
an
испытаний.
experimental platform for extremely dangerous biological trials.
Призываем задуматься
And
о
we
вполне
call
реальной
upon you
биологической угрозе
to
для
think
населения
about a
европейских
very
стран,
real biological
которую
danger to the people in
могут
European
породить
countries,
бесконтрольное
which can
расползание
result
биоагентов
from
из
an
Украины,
uncontrolled
которое,
spread of
как показал
bioagents from
опыт
Ukraine,
COVID-19,
which,
невозможно
as we have
остановить.
seen with COVID-19, is
И при
impossible to
таком
stop.
сценарии накроет
And
всю
if there
Европу.
is such a scenario, then all Europe
Представители
will
США
be covered
путаются в
by it.
показаниях насчет вовлеченности
Representatives
США
of
в
the United
военно-биологической
States
деятельности на территории
provide
Украины.
confusing information about the involvement of the United
Замгоссекретаря
States in
США
this
Виктория
activity.
Нуланд фактически
Victoria
подтвердила
Nuland,
факт
Assistant
ведения в украинских
Secretary of State,
биолабораториях
basically confirmed
опасных исследований
the
военной
fact
направленности в ходе
that
слушаний
there
в
were
Конгрессе 8
dangerous
марта.
studies being conducted in
Прямой
Ukrainian
вопрос сенатора
laboratories
Марко
in
Рубио о
Congress in
наличии на
8th of
Украине
March. There
биологического
was
и
a direct
химического
question
оружия.
put by
Она
Senator Marco
ответила, что там
Rubio,
есть,
and she
цитирую,
replied and
исследовательские
said
структуры,
that
которые
in Ukraine there
не должны
are
попасть в руки
research
российских
structures
вооруженных
which
сил.
should not end
Конец
up
цитаты.
in the hands of the Russian armed forces. End of quote.
При этом
At the same
Госдепартамент
time, the
продолжает
State
настаивать,
Department
что на
continue
территории Украины
insisting
якобы нет
that on the
подконтрольных США
territory
биолабораторий.
of Ukraine there are no laboratories under the control of the
В
United
связи с этим
States.
хотели бы задать
We would like
американской
to, in
делегации
this regard,
вопрос.
put a
Как с
question
этим
to the
вашим
American
утверждением
delegation.
стыкуется соглашение
How
от
can this
2005 года
tally
между Минобороны
with the
США и Минздравом
agreement of
Украины
2005 between your
о
Ministry of
сотрудничестве в
Defense
сфере
and Ministry of
распространения
Health of
технологий и
Ukraine
патогенов,
about
которые
cooperation
могут быть
in the
использованы в
area
разработке
of
биооружия?
development technologies and
Этот
pathogens
документ есть
which
в
could
открытом
be
доступе в интернете.
used so as to develop bioweapons.
Соответственно,
This
со статьей
document
3 этого
exists in the
соглашения
internet,
Минобороны США
and
может,
in line with
цитирую,
Article
оказывать Минздраву
3
Украины
of this
поддержку
agreement. The
в области
Ministry of Defense of
совместных
the United States
биологических
can
исследований, определения
extend
угроз от
assistance to the
биологических
Ministry
агентов
of
и выработки
Ukraine
ответа на них.
in the area of joint biological
Применительно к,
research,
снова
determining
цитирую,
threats from
опасным
biological
патогенам,
agents
размещенным
and
на объектах на
working out a
территории
response to
Украины.
them as relates to, and I quote, to the dangerous pathogens deployed on objects on the territory of Ukraine.
Хотим подчеркнуть,
And I would like to
биологическая угроза в
underscore
силу
here
своей
the
природы не
biological
знает
threats,
границ.
because of its very
Сегодня ни
nature, knows
один
no borders.
регион мира не
There is no
может
region in
чувствовать
the
себя в
world today who
безопасности.
can feel safe.
Соединенные Штаты
The
курируют
United
несколько сотен
States
биолабораторий,
are
расположенных в
overseeing
30 странах, в
several
том числе
hundreds
на Ближнем
laboratories
Востоке,
in
в
about
Африке, в
30
Юго-Восточной
countries in
Азии,
the Middle
а
East
также
and
по
Africa,
периметру
Southeast
бывшего
Asia, and also on
СССР.
the perimeter of the former
Поставить
USSR.
их под международную
Placing
верификацию
it under
Вашингтон
international
категорически
verification is
отказывается,
something that
блокируя с
Washington
2001 года
categorically refusing to
выработку
do. They've
юридически
blocked
обязывающего протокола
since
КБТО
2001 a legally binding
создании
protocol under the Biological Toxic
эффективного
Weapons
механизма
Convention
верификации
about creating
соблюдения
an effective
государствами этой конвенции.
verification mechanism to ensure
Это не может не
compliance.
наводить на мысль,
And
что
this can
Соединенным
but lead
Штатам
us to
есть
the
что
thought that
скрывать.
the United States have something to hide.
Призываю
I
коллег из
call
этих
upon
регионов
colleagues
задуматься,
in
какую
these
деятельность
regions to
Вашингтон
think
осуществляет на их
about
территории и
what kind of
каковы
an
будут
activity
последствия для
Washington is
населения.
conducting on their territory, what the consequences for your people will be.
Мы предвидим реакцию
I can
наших западных коллег,
foresee what the
которые сегодня
reaction
наверняка
will
будут
be from our
заявлять, что
Western
вся эта
colleagues, who I'm
информация
sure
фейк
are
и
going to be
российская
saying
пропаганда.
now that all of this information is fake and Russian
Но это
propaganda.
самовнушение
But
вряд ли
this
поможет
is
европейскому населению в
self-delusion, and I
случае
do
вспышек на
not think
Украине
this
и в
will be
сопредельных
helpful to the
государствах
European
с
people
последующим
in case there are
расползанием за
outbreaks
их
in
пределы
Ukraine
опасных
or neighboring
заболеваний.
states with further spread their wake dangerous diseases.
Риск этого
The
весьма реален с
risk
учетом
of
того
this is
интереса,
very real,
который
given
радикальные
the interest that
националистические
the radical
группировки на
nationalist
Украине
groups
проявляют
in
к
Ukraine are
проводившимся там
showing
интересах Минобороны США
towards
работу с
the
опасными
work
патогенами.
with dangerous pathogens conducted together with the Ministry of Defense of the United States.
Нам известно и о том, что в случае
We
любых таких
also know
инициатив
that
Пентагон прямо рекомендовал своим
in the
украинским
case of any
подопечным
such incident,
незамедлительно
Pentagon
обвинить
told
вооруженные силы
their
Российской Федерации,
Ukrainian
якобы наносящие удары по
colleagues
научно-исследовательским
to
и медицинским
immediately
учреждениям, либо
accuse
увязать
the
инциденты
armed
с
forces
деятельностью
of
российских
the
диверсионных
Russian
групп.
Federation of this, say that they are striking against scientific and medical institutions and or link these incidents with the Russian diversionary groups.
Минобороны России
The Ministry of
продолжает
Defense of
непрерывно
Russia
анализировать
continues
биологическую обстановку на
analyzing the
территории Украины
biological
и поступающие
situation in
материалы.
Ukraine and the materials we keep
То, что мы
receiving.
рассказали
What we
сегодня,
told you
лишь малая
today
толика
is
из
a
имеющихся у
very
нас
small
сведений.
portion of the
Подробная
information that
информация
we
мы
have.
распространим в
Detailed
самое
information
ближайшее время
is
в
something
качестве
that we will
официального документа
disseminate
Совета
in the very near
Безопасности
future.
ООН. Вы
As an
сможете ее
official
изучить.
document of Security Council, you will be
Мы
able to
считаем
study it.
своим долгом
We
держать
think it
Совет
is our
Безопасности в
duty
курсе
to
ситуации
keep the Security
с
Council
военно-биологической
informed of the
деятельностью США на
situation when
территории
it comes
Украины,
to the military biological
создающей реальные
activity by
риски
the
для
United States
международного мира и
in Ukraine. It
безопасности.
creates real risk for
И
international
намерены
peace and
вернуться к
security.
обсуждению этой
And we
темы уже в
intend to
ближайшее время.
revert to the discussion of this topic
Не
in the very
исключаем
near future.
перспективы
We
возможности
do not
задействования механизмов
exclude
статей
the
5 и 6 КБТО.
possibility of invoking the mechanism of Articles 5 and 6 of the
Пока же
Biological Toxic
рассчитываем
Weapons
получить ответ от
Convention.
американской
At
стороны
present,
на
however,
поставленный
we
вопрос.
expect to hear responses from the American side to the questions that we
Благодарю вас,
put.
господин
I
председатель.
thank you, Madam President.
أشكر ممثل الاتحاد الروسي على بيانه. أعطي
I would like to
الكلمة
thank the
لممثل
representative
ألبانيا.
of the Russian Federation, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me thank USG DiCarlo and USG Nakamisutu for their information. I would like to make the following points. First, we meet at the request of Russia following allegations on a possible program of development of biological weapons in Ukraine. We listened to their statement very carefully. Madam President, any issue regarding weapons of mass destruction should never be taken lightly. As we just heard from the USG, the United Nations is not aware of any of the alleged program inconsistent with international treaty obligations, including on chemical or biological weapons. We heard about health facilities in Ukraine. We have heard repeatedly also a firm rebuttal at the highest levels from both the US and Ukraine. Therefore, Russia's allegations are, in our opinion, part of the information warfare, false, unsubstantiated, part of the usual propaganda and the disinformation coming from Russia, conspiracy theories not worth our time. The Council should not be served with fantasies or story-eyed stories, but with proof, independently verified and corroborated. This is not the case. However regrettable all this is, it is hardly surprising since everything, absolutely everything we have been hearing from Russia regarding Ukraine has been false, fabricated, or distorted. These are all in the public space and do not deserve mentioning, but the real palme d'or goes to the Russian declaration just 2 days ago, according to which Russia has not attacked Ukraine. Well, as we saw last week, the UN General Assembly has a different account. In every other situation, everyone would have thought that this is a joke, except for the fact that this joke is destroying a country, is killing civilians, and is responsible for more than 2.5 million refugees and counting. That translates to 7,000 people per hour. Reportedly, this is also responsible for the death of several thousand Russian soldiers, but this is an issue for Russia and its people. All the more reasons for the immediate ceasefire and leave place to negotiations. Second, Madam President, Russia has a long and well-documented track record of using chemical weapons, including in attempted assassinations and in poisoning its own citizens, like the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny or the Skripals. Bellingcat reporting has been brilliantly able to make a direct and irrefutable link of the attempted deadly poisoning with GRU high officials. We should therefore be very worried that in spreading such disinformation, a crescendo of allegations about weapons of mass destruction could serve as yet another pretext for Russia to prepare the ground and use chemical or biological weapons during its ongoing invasion of Ukraine while accusing others. After all, Russia has accused Ukraine of genocide in Donbass, which is ridiculous. It has also accused Kiev of seeking to produce nuclear weapons, which is outrageous. It has accused Ukraine of bombarding its own cities, which is preposterous. As we have heard many times, including yesterday, Russia has and continues to support the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which has used chemical weapons against the civilian population. Dear colleagues, what should retain our attention and deserves our time is the escalating situation that is wrecking 2 countries, threatening a whole continent, and disrupting the entire world. 15 days into this brutal invasion and the growing armed might of Russia, with the open complicity of Belarus, has stalled before the steel-clad and indisputable right of a nation to defend its land. Russia's goals are as abhorrent as the means it is using to achieve them. We are horrified by the catastrophic situation in Mariupol and other besieged cities where civilians are starved, by the use of cluster ammunition and in urban areas, as we heard during the briefing, by the redoubling of blind shelling and bombardments, by more than 26 assaults on various health-related facilities or including ambulances, as confirmed by the WHO and confirmed during this meeting, by outrageous and immoral acts which constitute war crimes. These are facts. Nothing seems to be going as planned in Ukraine. The unprovoked, unjustified, and premeditated act of aggression by Russia, again with the complicity of Belarus, lacks any legal or moral ground. the very ones that in turn empower Ukrainians to fight heroically, be ready to die for the ideals they believe in, for the right to choose who they want to be shapers of their own destiny. In this respect, we welcome the conclusions of the European Council, which, among others, welcomed the will of Ukraine to join the European Union. We are warm-hearted by the Ukrainian resistance, incomprehensible maybe to the invader, and which should be seen as an inspiration and a reminder that freedom always prevails over tyranny. Let's not forget, colleagues, if Russia makes its way into Ukraine, it will not stop there. It will want more. And as history reminds us, aggression works like a drug. This is why David must and will prevail. I thank you.
أشكر ممثل ألبانيا على بيانه وأعطي الكلمة لممثلة الولايات المتحدة.
Thank Albania. The United States, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to our briefers for your remarks this morning. Russia asked the Security Council for today's meeting for the sole purpose of lying and spreading disinformation, and that is exactly what you have heard from the Russian PR this morning. You also heard from Ms. Nakamitsu that the UN is not aware of any biological or chemical weapons programs in Ukraine. Last month, Secretary Blinken laid out with tragic accuracy what Russia was about to do. He specifically warned that Russia would manufacture a pretext for attack and even cautioned that Russia would fabricate allegations about chemical or biological weapons to justify its own violent attacks against the Ukrainian people. Today, the world is watching Russia do exactly what we warned it would. Russia is attempting to use the Security Council to legitimize disinformation and deceive people to justify President Putin's war of choice against the Ukrainian people. And China, too, has been spreading disinformation in support of Russia's outrageous claims. I will say this once. Ukraine does not have a biological weapons program. There are no Ukrainian biological weapons laboratories supported by the United States, not near Russia's border or anywhere. So here are the facts. Ukraine owns and operates its own public health laboratory infrastructure. These facilities make it possible to detect and diagnose diseases like COVID-19, which benefit us all. The United States has assisted Ukraine to do this safely and securely. This is work that has been done proudly, clearly, and out in the open. This work has everything to do with protecting the health of people. It has absolutely nothing to do with biological weapons. In fact, it is Russia that has long maintained a biological weapon program in violation of international law. It is Russia that has a well-documented history of using chemical weapons. It is Russia who is the aggressor here. It was Russian operatives who poisoned Alexei Navalny and Sergei and Yulia Skripal with nerve agents. It is Russia that continues to support the Assad regime in Syria and shield it from accountability when the UN and the OPCW have confirmed that Assad has repeatedly used chemical weapons over the past several years. And we're deeply concerned that Russia's calling for this meeting is a potential false flag effort in action. Exactly the kind we have been warning about, including from Secretary Blinken here in the Security Council last month. Russia has a track record of falsely accusing other countries of the very violations that Russia itself is perpetrating. And given that, and consistent with our previous statements, we have serious concerns that Russia may be planning to use chemical or biological agents against the Ukrainian people. The intent behind these lies seem clear, and it is deeply troubling. We believe Russia could use chemical or biological agents for assassinations as part of a staged or false flag incident or to support tactical military operations. From the beginning, our strategy to counter Russia's tactics has been to share what we know with the world transparently. And candidly, we have been right more than we'd like to. We're not going to let Russia get away with lying to the world or staining the integrity of the Security Council by using this forum as a venue for legitimizing Putin's violence. Russia has attacked homes, schools, orphanages, and hospitals. Russia has attacked civilian infrastructure, including water and sanitation facilities. Their forces are laying Ukrainian cities under siege. Hundreds of thousands of civilians now don't have access to electricity for heat or drinking water to stay alive. Russia is the aggressor here. And despite Russia's best efforts, the media and everyday Ukrainians are documenting this truth on the ground. Russia can't paint over the front page of the New York Times, which on Monday featured the bodies of a Ukrainian mother and her 2 children who died while trying to cross a bridge outside Kyiv in their attempt to flee to safety. Russia cannot cover up the work of AP News reporters who captured a doctor attempting to resuscitate an 18-month-old Kirill who died from Russian shelling in Mariupol. Russia cannot suppress the social media posts confirmed and amplified by CBS News that told the story of the 11-year-old Ukrainian boy who fled to Slovakia by himself with only a passport, a plastic bag, and a phone number scrawled on his hands. Russia cannot silence the Al Jazeera report of Russian soldiers terrorizing Ukrainian cities. And Ukrainian journalists are risking their lives every day to deliver to the world the latest on-the-ground facts, such as Novo Vremye reporting on the reckless behavior of Russian forces toward Ukraine's nuclear facilities. Russia is failing in its quest to create an alternative reality. In fact, not even Russian diplomats can keep their propaganda straight. Just yesterday, the Kremlin spokesman said he didn't have clear information about the Russian forces who fired on a maternity hospital. Then the foreign minister himself denied Russia attacked Ukraine at all, right before admitting that Russia deliberately targeted this maternity hospital in Mariupol. Their fabrications didn't matter because the world had already seen the searing images broadcast on CNN of bloodied pregnant women being evacuated from the scene of Russia's attack on the hospital. Even Russia's own citizens are tiring of such lies. Russian athletes are writing "No war" on their shoes and on TV cameras. Russian citizens are marching in the streets and protesting Putin's war of choice. And even Russian state TV pundits, Putin's own propaganda arm, have called for Putin to stop the military action. This is why we didn't object to holding today's meeting. Today's meeting has confirmed our predictions, revealed Russia's objectives to the world, and exposed Russia's lies for what they are, a malicious effort to cover for the atrocities being committed by Russia as part of their illegal and unprovoked attack on Ukraine. It is a page directly out of the Russian playbook, and it will not convince us one bit. The world is watching. Photographic and video evidence is mounting, and you will be held to account for your actions. We will not let atrocities slide. Unlike the Russian government, whose first instinct is to silence, we are confident that truth and transparency will prevail. We call on President Putin to end this unprovoked, unconscionable war against the Ukrainian people. Thank you.
أشكر ممثلة الولايات المتحدة على بيانها وأعطي
I
الكلمة
thank the
لممثل
representative of the
فرنسا.
United States, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
je remercie Madame
I
Di
thank
Carlo et Madame Nakamitsu pour leurs
Madame
interventions.
and Nakamitsu
Je veux
for their
dénoncer
briefings. I
avec
wish
la plus
to
grande fermeté
denounce in
les
the
allégations
strongest of
infondées
terms
de la
the
Russie.
unfounded allegations of Russia.
Il y aurait, dit-elle,
Russia would
des attaques
have us
chimiques
believe
en préparation
that
en Ukraine.
chemical attacks are being prepared in
Il y
Ukraine.
aurait des laboratoires de
Russia would
recherche
also have us
sur
believe
les
that
armes
there are
bactériologiques.
bioweapon research laboratories.
Soyons sérieux. Les
Let us
mensonges
be
de la
serious.
Russie
No
ne
one
trompent
is fooled
personne.
by Russia's lies.
Ils font partie d'une
They
stratégie
are
cynique
part of a
de
cynical
désinformation
disinformation
et d'écrans de
strategy
fumée
and
dont
a
la
smoke
Russie a
screen
fait une
which
véritable arme
Russia
de
has
guerre.
used to make
Nous avons
into a
dénoncé ces
veritable weapon of
provocations
war. We
irresponsables
denounced these
il y a seulement
irresponsible
quelques jours à
provocations just a few days
l'OIAC
ago at the
avec
OPCW,
46 autres États
along with
partis.
46 other states parties.
Ce n'est pas la première fois que
Furthermore,
la
this
Russie
is not
diffuse
the
des
first
mensonges
time that Russia is
pour attiser
spreading
la
lies to
confusion,
cause confusion,
semer la peur et
so
surtout couvrir sa
fear,
propre
and more
responsabilité.
importantly, cover up its own
Rappelons
responsibility. Let
une
us
évidence,
remember the
c'est bien la
facts.
Russie et non l'Ukraine
It is Russia
qui a
and
eu
not
recours
Ukraine
à des armes chimiques ces
that
dernières années
resorted
sur le
to
sol européen.
chemical weapons
C'est également elle
in
qui
recent
tente de
years
couvrir
on European
par la
soil.
désinformation
It is also Russia
les
which
attaques
is seeking
chimiques
to
du
cover
régime
up
syrien.
through disinformation the chemical
La
attacks
France est
of
très
the Syrian
préoccupée
regime.
par la
France is
possibilité que
very
cette
concerned
campagne
at
de
the possibility
désinformation
that this
puisse être le
disinformation
prélude
campaign
à
may be
l'utilisation
the
d'une arme
prelude
chimique
to
ou
the use
biologique
of a
orchestrée par la
chemical
Russie
or
en Ukraine.
biological weapon orchestrated by
Ces
Russia
armes sont
in
bannies
Ukraine.
par le droit
These
international.
weapons are banned
Elles ne
under
doivent jamais être
international law. They
utilisées
must never
dans
be
aucun
used
contexte
in no
par qui que ce
context
soit.
whatsoever by
La Russie s'y est engagée en ratifiant
Russia
la
committed
Convention
to this by
d'interdiction des armes
ratifying the
biologiques
Convention on the
et la
Prohibition
Convention
of Biological
d'interdiction
Weapons
des
and
armes
the
chimiques.
Convention on the Prohibition
Les
of Chemical
exposés
Weapons.
que nous avons entendus
The
ce
briefings that
matin
we heard this
sont
morning
clairs.
are clear.
La réalité,
The
c'est que
reality
la Russie a
is that
prémédité
Russia
l'agression d'un État
premeditated
souverain,
its aggression against a
violé
sovereign
la Charte des
state.
Nations Unies.
It violated the United
La
Nations
réalité, c'est
Charter.
que la Russie a
And
jeté
the
sur les
reality
routes
is
des
that
millions
Russia
d'Ukrainiens,
pushed millions of
provoquant la plus
Ukrainians
grave crise
into the
humanitaire
streets
en Europe
and led
depuis
to
la
this
Seconde
led
Guerre
to the
mondiale.
most serious humanitarian
C'est la
crisis in
Russie
Europe since the
qui
Second World
bombarde
War.
quotidiennement depuis 15
Russia
jours
is the one
Mariupol
that for the
et tant
past
d'autres
15
villes
days has
ukrainiennes
been
et
daily
d'installations
bombing
civiles
Mariupol and
en
so many
violation
other
du droit
Ukrainian cities
international
and civilian
humanitaire.
installations in violation of international
C'est la
humanitarian
Russie
law.
qui tue chaque
It is
jour
Russia which
davantage
each day is
d'Ukrainiens
killing
innocents.
more
La
Ukrainian
désinformation,
innocents.
pas plus que le veto, ne
Neither
saurait masquer
disinformation
cette
nor
dure
the veto
réalité.
can mask this
Les
harsh
lois
reality.
adoptées par Moscou pour
Neither
museler la
will
presse et
the
les voix
laws
qui s'élèvent
adopted
contre la
by
guerre en
Moscow
Russie
to muzzle the
n'y
press
parviendront pas
and the
non
voices
plus.
against the war in Russia.
Ni les Russes, ni le
Russia
monde ne sont
can
dupes.
fool neither
Je vous
Russians
remercie.
nor the world. Thank you.
أشكر ممثل فرنسا على بيانه وأعطي
I thank
الكلمة
the
الآن
representative of
لممثلة
France, and I now give the
المملكة
floor to the
المتحدة.
representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Russia has today brought into the Security Council a series of wild, completely baseless, and irresponsible conspiracy theories. Let me put it diplomatically. They are utter nonsense. There is not a shred of credible evidence that Ukraine has a biological weapons program. Ukraine is a state party to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention in good standing. As we've heard, the research facilities are established facilities set up to deal with public health hazards. The UN briefers today have confirmed this. This is yet another lie in Russia's disinformation campaign. They said they would not invade Ukraine. They then invaded. Foreign Minister Lavrov then said they hadn't invaded, and he repeated this absurdity yesterday. A whole pack of lies. They said Ukraine was preparing a dirty bomb. That was a lie too. They said yesterday that a pregnant woman staged her injuries in the Mariupol hospital bombing. That was a grotesque lie. Russia is sinking to new depths today. But this council must not get dragged down with it. So let's get back to the facts. Russia is invading Ukraine in violation of international law. Russia is killing hundreds of civilians through indiscriminate shelling of Ukrainian cities. It is using cluster munitions and thermobaric rockets, weapons designed to inflict maximum damage wherever they are deployed. It is targeting hospitals and schools and committing war crimes. Thousands of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers are dead, deaths that will shatter the lives of families they've left behind. 2.5 million Ukrainians have become refugees. 1 million children forced to flee from President Putin's invasion. This is a war of choice that Russia needs to end. Colleagues, Russia has broken its commitments under the Charter, but we must not let it subvert the multilateral system itself. As the UN said today, Russia is now putting at threat the global framework for peace and security. The Security Council is responsible for addressing many serious conflicts around the world. We have important work to do. We do not sit in this chamber to be an audience for Russia's domestic propaganda. And we should not allow Russia to abuse its permanent seat to spread disinformation and lies and pervert the purpose of the Security Council. Let us resolve today that this Council remains focused on the real threats to international peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Nakamitsu and USG DiCarlo for their briefings. We have noted the recent statements by states and wider information regarding the biological activities relating to Ukraine. In this context, we would like to underline the importance attached by India to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, BTWC, as a key global and non-discriminatory disarmament convention prohibiting an entire category of weapons of mass destruction. It is important to ensure full and effective implementation of the BTWC in letter and spirit. We also believe that any matters relating to obligations under the BTWC should be addressed as per the provisions of the convention and through consultation and cooperation between the parties concerned. Mr. President, we have repeatedly expressed serious concern over the ongoing situation in Ukraine. We sincerely hope that the ongoing direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine would lead to cessation of hostilities. There is no other alternative except the path of diplomacy and dialogue. The dire humanitarian situation needs immediate and urgent attention. We once again call upon member states to adhere to the principles of the UN Charter and international law and respect the sovereignty and integrity of states. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of India for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Agradecemos las presentaciones de la subsecretaria Rosemary DiCarlo y de la alta representante Nakamitsu y tomamos nota de la información que nos han compartido. Igualmente, hemos escuchado con interés la declaración del vocero del secretario general en el sentido de que la Organización Mundial de la Salud no tiene conocimiento de actividad alguna por parte del gobierno ucraniano contraria a sus obligaciones derivadas del Tratado sobre Armas Biológicas, lo cual ha sido reiterado en esta sesión por la alta representante para temas de desarme de la ONU. México está comprometido con el cumplimiento de la Convención para la Prohibición del Desarrollo, la producción y el almacenamiento de armas bacteriológicas y toxínicas. Es un tratado fundamental del régimen de desarme de las Naciones Unidas. Y en casos de controversia, estas deben ser atendidas mediante los mecanismos establecidos por la propia Convención, toda vez que no se dispone de un mecanismo de verificación externo, como es el caso de las armas químicas. Por ello, es oportuno recordar que el artículo 5 de dicha convención estipula que los Estados partes se comprometen a consultarse y a cooperar entre sí en la solución de los problemas que surjan con relación al objetivo de la convención o en aplicación de sus disposiciones, y que las consultas y la cooperación podrán realizarse mediante procedimientos internacionales pertinentes en el ámbito de las Naciones Unidas y de conformidad con la Carta. Presidente, México se opone categóricamente al empleo de armas biológicas por cualquier actor y bajo cualquier circunstancia, así como a cualquier ataque contra las instalaciones médicas, científicas o asistenciales en Ucrania. Concluyo reiterando el llamado urgente al cese al fuego y en tanto este se logre, llamamos a establecer de inmediato una pausa humanitaria sostenible que garantice la protección a la población civil y el acceso a la ayuda humanitaria a quien la necesite sin restricciones ni exclusiones. Gracias, presidente.
I thank the representative of Mexico for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And let me begin by thanking the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Isuzimi Nakamitsu, and the USG for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, for their briefings to the Council this morning. I also welcome the participation in this meeting of the representative of Ukraine. Mr. President, Ghana has taken due and careful note of the briefings and the remarks of delegations that are spoken before us. We believe that on account of the information before us, a determination of Ukraine's biological programs can only be made after further assessment by relevant institutions, such as the World Health Organization, to establish the situation of the biological laboratories under consideration and the state of infectious disease research that were being undertaken therein. It is in this regard that we urge the parties to respect the call for an unconditional and immediate ceasefire and for the Russian Federation to withdraw all of its invading troops from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, bearing in mind the incalculable consequences that an accidental or deliberate release of chemical or biological agents in the conflict theater could have on the populations in and around Ukraine, but also on global stability and an already fragile security environment. The weaponization of chemical and biological agents in the war in Ukraine or anywhere else would be wrong, and that should not even be contemplated. As a state party to the Biological Weapons Convention, we believe that the call for a verification regime for the BWC continues to be valid, and that such an additional protocol could be done in a manner that is reasonable and sensible, especially in light of recent global developments, including the COVID-19 pandemic. Ghana remains deeply concerned about the escalation of military bombardments in several cities of Ukraine, which have given rise to a rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation described by many as the worst in Europe since the end of the Second World War. We are also concerned by the transmission of shocks of the war in Ukraine within the global economy and the disproportionate impact that developing countries and small economies are having to bear on account of this war, many of whom are already in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic and contend with the deaths of several thousands from the socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic beyond the scope of global attention. International solidarity is therefore important even as we maintain global cohesion and stability. We remind the warring parties of their obligation to respect and comply with their commitments under international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights law. In particular, we call for the protection of civilians and humanitarian workers in Ukraine in accordance with the provisions of the 4th Geneva Convention of 1949 relative to the protection of civilian persons in the time of war. Mr. President, in concluding, let me recall Ghana's long-held view that the possession or proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, including chemical and biological weapons, neither assures international peace nor national security. We all therefore have a responsibility to ensure that we eliminate such weapons from the present civilization we are seeking to build. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Ghana for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank the High Representative Nakamitsu and Under Secretary General DiCarlo for their sober briefings this morning. Mr. President, Ireland deeply regrets the decision of the Russian Federation to call for today's meeting. It has done so for no other reason than to advance baseless claims against Ukraine and the United States. Ireland has a long-standing and clear policy on biological, chemical, and other weapons of mass destruction. It is intolerable that Russia, as part of its attempts to excuse its unjustifiable and unlawful aggression against Ukraine, is making unsubstantiated and unfounded claims against Ukraine regarding the alleged development and possible use of biological and chemical weapons. The prohibitions on biological and chemical weapons must not be undermined. Given the reckless disregard for nuclear safety and security shown by Russian forces since the start of the invasion, there are fears for CBRN safety arising from the invasion. This in no way, however, supports the claims of weapons of mass destruction development in Ukraine. We are familiar with this approach by the Russian Federation. It forms part of a long-standing pattern by the Russian Federation to use disinformation in multiple multilateral fora to distract, deny, and cover up its own transgressions and aggressions. Ireland considers it unacceptable to levy such accusations against Ukraine, a state party in good standing to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Chemical Weapons Convention, and the Biological Weapons Convention. These instruments are doing their vital job of ensuring non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and no evidence has been advanced to support such allegations in these fora. Earlier this week, 48 states, including Ireland, challenged these unsubstantiated claims by Russia in the OPCW. I urge the Russian Federation to cease its campaign of disinformation and not to use this Council as a platform to spread disinformation. Such harmful actions demean this body and its role in maintaining international peace and security. Mr. President, the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine has created a humanitarian catastrophe. In another effort to mislead and misinform, we've been told by the Russian Federation that the humanitarian crisis we are seeing in Ukraine is not a result of its actions. However, as UN briefers confirmed again today, it is clear that the Russian offensive is causing the suffering of millions, resulting in a rapidly rising toll of internally displaced persons and refugees in need of humanitarian assistance. Millions of people in Ukraine are struggling with the humanitarian consequences of this senseless aggression. Whatever is agreed or not agreed on humanitarian safe passage, civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected. Compliance with international humanitarian law is not optional, it is an obligation. Full, safe and unhindered access to provide humanitarian assistance is urgently needed. Mr. President, one more time, Ireland urges the Russian Federation to immediately cease hostilities, unconditionally withdraw from the entire territory of Ukraine, and refrain from further threat or use of force of any kind against Ukraine. It is beyond time to choose dialogue and diplomacy as the only pathway to resolve this conflict. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement. I give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, President, and I thank USG DiCarlo and High Representative Nakamitsu for their statements. 2 weeks ago, the Russian Federation, in blatant violation of international law, chose to wage an outright war against its peaceful neighbor, Ukraine. We reiterate our condemnation of this act of aggression. A few days later, Russia misused its veto to prevent the Security Council for fulfilling its mandate to maintain international peace and security. And today, Russia has called for a meeting based on an uncorroborated narrative, insinuating that Ukraine is developing biological weapons. This impacts the credibility of this Council. Let us not forget the real threat to international peace and security that we are witnessing, an illegal war waged by the Russian Federation against another sovereign UN member state. And we condemn the use of cluster munition by the Russian Federation, confirmed here today. The Russian invasion was preceded by fabricated claims and unfounded allegations. And it is intolerable that Russia now makes the unsubstantiated claim that Ukraine was preparing aggressive action with the use of biological weapons. Similar allegations have also emerged when it comes to chemical weapons production. As we heard from the UN briefers, they are not aware of that Ukraine has developed or planned to use either chemical or biological weapons. President, Norway remains a staunch supporter of the Biological Weapons Convention, which remains one of the pillars of disarmament and the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, together with the Non-Proliferation Treaty and Chemical Weapons Convention. And we condemn any use of such weapons, which would constitute a clear violation of these conventions. The convention have established a total ban on chemical and biological weapons. All states parties were obliged to destroy their stocks of such weapons when they entered into these two agreements. Universal adherence and full implementation by all state parties are key. And I would like to remind that Russia must, as a party to both conventions, uphold their international obligation just like all states parties must. Chemical and biological weapons cannot and must not be used in war. President, I'm deeply concerned by the growing humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, and we are appalled by the blatant lack of respect for international humanitarian law displayed by the Russian military forces. In particular, the blatant disregard for their obligation to protect the Ukrainian civilian population. Every day we see numerous reports of Russian shelling of homes, schools, hospitals and other critical civilian infrastructure. This is unacceptable and must stop. The horrifying reports from this week's attack on a medical facility in Mariupol are yet another example of the disrespect for international humanitarian law. The space for humanitarian action must be restored, and it must be protected in a way that ensures continuous and sustained humanitarian access. Russia must end this war now. We need a withdrawal of all forces and engagement in good faith toward a political solution. Diplomatic solution must prevail. Thank you.
I would like to thank the representative of Norway and give the floor to China.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the situation in Ukraine is still rapidly evolving with growing complexity and sensitivity. What is most needed now continues to be to intensify diplomatic efforts, reduce tension, and bring the Ukrainian issue back to the track of a political settlement as soon as possible, while making efforts to prevent a massive large-scale humanitarian crisis. Stop fighting and hostilities is a widespread desire of the international community. Peace negotiations are the only viable means to achieve that goal. Recently, Russia and Ukraine have held multiple rounds of direct talks, and the two foreign ministers held a high-level meeting yesterday. All these are positive steps towards achieving peace. The international community should continue to encourage and support Russia and Ukraine in their negotiations and create necessary environment and conditions for such peace talks. China will continue to work with the international community and play its part in de-escalating the situation and seeking peace. Mr. President, China attaches great importance to biosafety and security and consistently stands for complete prohibition and thorough destruction of all WMDs, including biological weapons, firmly opposes the development, possession, and use of biological and chemical weapons by any country and under any circumstances, and encourage those countries that have not yet destroyed their stockpiles of chemical weapons to do so as soon as possible. The purposes and the principles of the Biological Weapons Convention should be strictly upheld. Biological weapons are weapons of mass destruction. Any information and leads on biomilitary activities should trigger high attention from the international community. China has noted with concern relevant information released by Russia to uphold the Biological Weapons Convention is an obligation for all state parties. The concerns raised by Russia should be properly addressed. China urges relevant parties to effectively implement their obligation under the Convention, provide a comprehensive clarification, and accept a multilateral verification. We have taken note of the press report that WHO has advised to the Ukrainian government to destroy the pathogens located in those labs in order to prevent the spread of infectious diseases. We look forward to be receiving more specific information on this. Under the current situation and for the sake of public health, we call for ensuring the safety and security of relevant laboratories. Mr. President, the U.S. representative in her statement made groundless allegations against China, which we firmly reject. The international community have been raising concerns about the U.S. military biological activities. They have around the world 336 laboratories. This number comes from the information provided by the U.S. to the Conference of Parties of the BCW. The U.S. said they are for transparency. If they believe the relevant information is fake, all they can do is to provide us with relevant data, provide clarification so that the international community can draw a conclusion by itself. Thank you, Mr. President.
I would like to thank the representative of China for his statement and give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, biological weapons were the first category of weapon of mass destruction to be subject to a comprehensive prohibition. The Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, adopted in 1972, binds all state parties to the obligation to, and I quote, never in any circumstances to develop, produce, stockpile, or otherwise acquire such weapons, end of quote. Brazil believes that any accusations regarding violations of the basic prohibitions set out by the BWC are extremely serious and, as such, must be thoroughly substantiated by solid evidence. Such evidence must be presented to and confirmed by an independent and impartial authority, as foreseen in Article 4 of the Biological Weapons Convention. It is unfortunate that such investigation mechanisms are not strong enough at the moment. Brazil also believes that legitimate scientific and technological research on biosafety and biosecurity should be kept distinct and separate from possible violations of the prohibition against the development and production of biological weapons if we wish to preserve the BWC regime. Research into new and dangerous pathogens should be subject to strict transparency mechanisms. Brazil has long favored the negotiation of a multilateral verification protocol as a complement to the BWC, with additional measures to guarantee protection and security against emerging biological threats. The situation before the Council today only reinforces the urgency and the necessity of such a mechanism. Brazil strongly condemns the use or threat of use of weapons of mass destruction, including biological and chemical weapons, anywhere, by anyone, under any circumstances. I thank you.
I would like to thank the representative of Brazil for his statement and give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Mary DiCarlo and High Representative Nakamitsu for their briefings, and I welcome the participation of the representative of Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine continues at unacceptable cost to the people of Ukraine and increasingly to the entire world as the prices of essential commodities rise sharply. Our hearts go to the families who have lost loved ones, as well as the millions of refugees and internally displaced persons. We are also gravely concerned that the armed conflict has not spared objects indispensable to the survival of civilian populations, including residential homes, health facilities, as well as power and water infrastructure. Mr. President, we have listened with deep concern to the serious allegations of the development of biological weapons in contravention of the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Biological and Toxin Weapons. The Security Council, as mandated in the Biological Weapons Convention, is obliged to consider complaints brought forward by any state party to the Convention against the breach of this Convention. The Convention weighs the Security Council with the responsibility to consider whether to carry out an investigation. Should a state party formally lodge a complaint to trigger such a process, we must make the obvious observation that there would need to be a halt to the armed conflict to enable an investigation. That, Mr. President, would then bring us to precisely the same situation where we are in today, even as Ukraine and Russia's diplomats have just met in Antalya to explore an agreed basis for a ceasefire. We urge them to redouble their efforts and to make use of the willingness of many countries to lend their every assistance to their talks. Mr. President, the risks of this conflict broadening and escalating should be taken with extreme seriousness. Already, its effects are being experienced far outside Ukraine. The sanctions and counter-sanctions are threatening the world food supply, and rapid energy price increases will drive millions more people into poverty, even as they struggle to recover from COVID's impact. Humanity is teetering on the edge of a precipice. The coming economic shock, if a ceasefire is not imminently announced, will be accompanied by political crisis and more conflict situations. In regard to the serious allegations we have had, whatever action is undertaken in the Security Council should be matched by a newfound commitment by all member states to the Biological Weapons Convention. We urge its 183 states parties to seize the opportunity of the 9th Review Conference later this year to strengthen the biological weapons regime and the norms that safeguard humanity from the threat of use of these abhorrent weapons. Ultimately, Mr. President, the only way out of this crisis is to pause the armed conflict and give a chance to dialogue to shape a stable European security order in which the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all members is protected. I reaffirm Kenya's recognition of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. I thank you.
أشكر ممثل
I would
كينيا
like to
على
thank the
بيانه
representative of
وأعطي
Kenya for
الكلمة
his statement and
لممثل
give the floor
غابون.
to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le secrétaire général adjoint, Madame Di Carlo et Madame Nakamitsu pour leur exposé et les informations qu'ils nous ont livrées. Et salue la participation à ce débat de notre collègue de l'Ukraine. Nous tenons cette réunion dans un contexte marqué par le risque d'utilisation d'armes de destruction massive. Monsieur le Président, les graves accusations réciproques de part et d'autre autour de cette table faisant état des risques persistants d'utilisation d'armes chimiques en lien avec les programmes d'expérimentation en cours ne préfigure absolument rien de bon pour l'humanité. Mon pays appelle les parties à s'en tenir au strict respect des dispositions pertinentes de la Convention sur les armes biologiques qui interdit formellement l'utilisation des armes à large spectre ainsi que leur mise au point, leur fabrication et leur stockage. Mon pays, en tant qu'État membre de la Convention des Nations Unies sur l'interdiction des armes biologiques, réaffirme son opposition à toute utilisation ou toute forme d'armes biologiques et appelle les belligérants à s'abstenir de recourir à de telles armes et à respecter le droit international. Le Gabon réitère son attachement au règlement pacifique des différends entre États membres des Nations Unies Et nous continuons d'appeler les parties à la désescalade et à s'investir dans les négociations en cours afin d'arrêter les souffrances des populations civiles qui payent un lourd tribut depuis le début des hostilités en Ukraine. Monsieur le Président, il est fondamental que ce Conseil s'élève au-delà de la logique de confrontation et de condamnation pour faire prévaloir la recherche d'une solution crédible afin d'éviter un embrasement dont nul ne peut prédire les conséquences. La diplomatie doit reprendre le dessus. C'est une exigence et même une urgence si nous voulons rétablir la paix et la sécurité en Ukraine. Nous devons offrir une véritable alternative au langage assourdissant des armes et aux menaces d'utilisation d'armes non conventionnelles. Le Conseil de sécurité ne peut pas et ne doit pas être le lieu d'échange d'invectives et de réaffirmation des rivalités. Il doit plus que jamais se réconcilier avec sa vocation de fabrique de solutions pour le règlement.
أشكر ممثل غابون على بيانه. طلب ممثل الاتحاد الروسي الكلمة للإدلاء ببيان آخر. أعطي له الكلمة.
Господин председатель, какие выводы можно сделать из сегодняшней дискуссии? Как мы и предполагали, мои западные коллеги, прежде всего, никто из них не говорил по существу поставленного нами вопроса. Когда моя американская коллега метала громы молнии, обвиняя нас, как мы и предполагали, в пропаганде, вспомнились две вещи. Во-первых, наша русская пословица «На варе и шапка горит», «Guilty mind is never at ease». Чем громче и голословнее пытаются свалить вину на нас наши коллеги, тем больше мы убеждаемся, что попали в точку, рассказывая про их достаточно нелицеприятную деятельность. Во-вторых, невозможно не вспомнить на другую историю, которая неоднократно уже упоминалась в разных контекстах, о знаменитой пробирке Колина Пауэлла в этом самом зале, что стало основанием для интервенции Соединенных Штатов в Ирак, повлекшей колоссальные человеческие жертвы и разрушения, которые потом аукнулись в целом регионе.
Which then reverberated in the whole region, reverberated also in the form of a terrorist organization called ISIL. That is the real palm door that the Albanian colleague mentioned today. In his statement, many of you said that you are unaware of the military biological programs in Ukraine. That doesn't mean that they didn't exist in actual fact. Military development is a secret enterprise, and those who are involved in that do not report to Ms. Nakamitsu about it.
Мне вспоминается Ирак и Мосул, которые были стерты с лица земли и похоронили под их руинами тысячи мирных жителей. Силами коалиции во главе Соединенных Штатов. Эти трупы лежали там несколько месяцев. Я что-то не припомню праведного гнева со стороны коллег по этому поводу. Мы неоднократно поднимали этот вопрос на заседаниях СБ, но тема просто умерла.
Raised this issue many times, but this died and was buried, and people prefer not to recall that. But on the other hand, we hear every day about the atrocities of the Russian army attacks on hospitals, kindergartens, schools, maternity hospitals using cluster bombs, something that was refuted repeatedly by our Ministry of Defense. The maternity hospital #1 in Mariupol has become the common parlance in this regard.
Я хочу вас спросить, вы
Let me
слушали то,
ask
что мы
you
говорили
this.
здесь, в этом здании, в
Did you
понедельник, 7
listen
марта?
to what we said here in
О том,
this room
что
on Monday,
боевики,
7th of March,
радикалы
when we said that the fighters, the
превратили это здание
radicals,
в огневую точку?
converted
Вы
that
предупреждали
building
об этом еще тогда.
into an attack base? This is
Но,
something
видимо,
that
вы
we
не
warned
слушаете, не
about
хотите
even
слышать,
then.
что
But
мы говорим.
apparently you don't listen or you don't hear what it is that
Вы
we say.
видели фотографии
Did
якобы
you
разрушенного
see the photos
бомбы или ракеты
of
роддома?
the
Они у меня
allegedly
есть.
destroyed maternity hospital, the building
На
of the
них видно
hospital
здание без
destroyed by a
окон,
bomb? What you can
но не
see
разрушенное.
there is a building without windows, but
Вот,
it's not
пожалуйста.
destroyed. Here are the photos.
Вы представляете себе,
Can
что должно было
you
случиться с созданием,
imagine
которое было подвергнуто
what would have
бомбовому или ракетному
happened
удару?
to a building if it underwent a bomb
И с теми, кто находился внутри
strike
здания.
or shelling, as well as to those who were inside the
Фото
building?
из
What
здания,
would have
снятые
happened to
внутри
it?
видео, они у меня тоже есть.
So we have the
Вот
videos
они.
from inside the building. Here they are.
Демонстрирует беспорядок,
they
перевернутую мебель и нетронутые стулья.
That there is disorder, overturned furniture,
Еще раз
and
прошу вас, вы
untouched
представляете, какие следы
intact
разрушений должны
chairs.
были
Once
остаться
again,
после
can you imagine what kind of
бомбового или ракетного
destruction
здания,
would have
удара по
remained
зданию?
in the wake of a building
Военные
hit by a
специалисты вам
rocket
скажут
or a
об этом.
bomb? Ask military
Они уже
specialists, they will
сказали,
tell you. They have
продемонстрировав
already
фото
said
воронки
that.
рядом со зданием,
They
которая по
showed the
всем признакам
photos of
образовалась
a
в результате
crater
взрыва
near the
заложенной в
building,
грунт мины. Вот
which
это фотография.
resulted from an exploded mine.
Между тем,
At the same time,
нам сообщают о
we are being
17 раненых
told
в
about the
этом здании.
17 wounded in the building,
И ни об одном погибшем, кстати
and
говоря.
not a single death, by the
И
way.
в качестве доказательства
And
предъявляют
by way
фальшивую
of
фотографию
evidence, what is
украинской
showed
блогерши
is a false
Марианны
picture
Подгурской,
of a Ukrainian blogger, Mariana
снятой
Podgurskaya, here,
стрингером AP
which
Евгением
she was
Малолеткой.
shot by an AP
Причем эта
stringer,
блогерша
Evgeny
на двух
Maloletka. This
фотографиях загримирована
blogger
как две разные
lady
женщины.
is using two different kinds of makeup
Это
to
все было
present herself as two
разоблачено
different
самими
women
пользователями
in
сети.
photographs. And this is something that was
Нас
revealed by
возмущает
the
гнусная,
network users
грязная
themselves.
кампания очернения
We
российских военных,
are
которые обвиняют в
dismayed
преднамеренных
by the
атаках на
dirty
гражданские объекты.
campaign to blame us
Вы
for
обвиняете нас
intentionally shelling a civilian
в пропаганде и фейках,
infrastructure.
совершенно игнорируя
You
то
are accusing us
зашкаливающее
of
количество
propaganda and
фейков,
fake,
пекущихся
whilst
в центрах,
ignoring a
в
huge
украинских и
number of
западных
fakes which
центрах
are being churned out in Ukraine and in the
специальных
West.
психологических операций.
So as to conduct a
При
special
этом
psychological
вы
operation.
стыдливо умалчиваете
At
о
the
том,
same
что
time,
практически
you
полностью
coyly
отключили
going
доступ к
over
российским источникам
in
информации.
silence over the fact that you have basically
Мы
shut
за
off
эти
your
дни
access to
узнали
Russian
много
sources of
нового о свободе
information.
слова,
We found a great deal of
чемпионами
new things
которой вы
these
себя
days
представляете.
about the
Хочу
freedom
ответить
of
своей
speech that
британской
you seem
коллеге,
to
она была
champion.
неоднократно
I
упоминала об
would
этом,
like to
процитировав
react now
министра
to
Лаврова, как всегда, не
my
полностью.
UK colleague. She
О том,
quoted
что он
Minister
сказал, что
Lavrov
мы не начали
incompletely
войну.
as usual
Я
when he
вам
said
предоставляю
that
точную
we
цитату.
did not
Мы не
start
начали
the
эту
war.
войну.
This is the
Мы
exact
хотим
word.
ее
We
завершить.
did not start this
Война
war.
действительно
We
началась
want
не
to
нами.
end
Началась
it.
8
And it
лет
is
назад
true that the war was not
киевскими
begun by us.
властями
It
на
started
Донбассе.
8 years ago by the Kiev authorities
Вчера
in
в
the
интернете
Donbass.
появилось видео, на
Yesterday
котором
in the
украинские
internet we
люди в
show a
военной
video
форме
where Ukrainians
где-то
wear
под Харьковом,
military
как сказано
form
там,
near Kharkov, let's say,
сбивают,
are
предположительно
shooting
сбивают
down
российский военный
what is
самолет
supposed to be
из переносного зенитно-ракетного
what
комплекса.
is supposed to be a Russian plane
Рядом
using a
стоит автомобиль,
movable rocket launcher.
в котором
There is a
предположительно
car
эти
right
люди прибыли.
next to it, the car in
У меня есть эта
which apparently they used to arrive there. Here's a picture.
Белого цвета, предположительно Toyota, на котором
White
видна надпись Организации Объединенных Наций.
Toyota bearing a logo of the United Nations.
Мы уже задавали этот вопрос
We've already asked
представителям
this question
секретариата,
to the
когда мы
representative of
получили
the
ответ,
Secretariat, and
что ООНовские
the
автомобили не
answer
используются
was that
Украиной
UN
силами
vehicles
территориальной
are
обороны,
not
как
being
утверждалось,
used by the
они
Ukrainian
использовали их в
territorial
Краматорске.
defense.
Мы настаиваем на
We
расследовании ООН
insist
этого инцидента,
on
даже
this
если
incident being
окажется, что
investigated by the UN, even if
это
it
не
turns
ООНовское
out that
транспортное
this is
средство.
not a
Нанесение
UN
ООНовской
car.
символики логотипа на
Nonetheless,
автомобиль, используемый
using
для
a
боевых
UN
действий,
logo on a
недопустимо.
car which is used for military activities is unacceptable. I think.
أشكر ممثل الاتحاد الروسي على بيانه.
I thank the representative of
طلبت ممثلة الولايات المتحدة الكلمة للإدلاء بيان آخر. أعطي لها الكلمة.
I know that you expect me to respond but we're not going to give any more airtime to the lies that you're hearing today. It's beneath this council, and there's only one aggressor here, and that is Russia. And we hope they will be able to find it in their conscience to end the attacks and stop the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Thank you.
أشكر ممثلة الولايات المتحدة على
I thank the
بيانها.
representative of the United States for her statement.
أعطي الكلمة الآن لممثل
I now give
أوكرانيا.
the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, Madam Under-Secretary General DiCarlo, Madam Under-Secretary General Nakamitsu. I should also acknowledge the presence of a separate category here, a representative of the aggressor state who sits in the seat of the Soviet Union in the Security Council, the status of which was recognized by the General Assembly Resolution ES 11/1, and that is the status of aggressor state. There is already a long record of Russian lies established here in the Council, and only the recollection of the items of lies over the last 2 weeks will take perhaps an hour or so. But let me mention just a couple lowest of the lowest, and I would not hesitate to mention them again after the representative sitting in the Soviet seat just referred to them. Let me quote his kingpin, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, who said yesterday, indeed, I quote, "We do not plan to attack other countries. We did not attack Ukraine either." End of quote. An outlet of the Russian lies, the Russian embassy in London, tweeted yesterday that a pregnant woman is in the attacked maternity hospital in Mariupol, was wearing makeup and was playing multiple roles of pregnant women. And indeed, Moscow and the Russian ambassador here are struggling to get this story straight. Kremlin spokesman Peskov told Reuters in the immediate aftermath of the strike on Wednesday that, I quote, "Russian forces do not fire on civilian targets," end of quote. On Thursday, he told reporters that the Kremlin would look into the incident, I quote, "because you and I don't have clear information about what happened there," end of quote. Following a meeting with the Ukrainian foreign minister in Turkey on Thursday, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov took a different stance, as he claimed without evidence that the hospital in Mariupol was a warranted target because the building had been seized long ago by Ukrainian armed groups. Let me share with you a very good news. Miss Mariana, the pregnant woman, gave birth to a healthy daughter last night. Her name is Veronica. Here she is with her father. No matter what the Russian lies are about herself, her family, and the incident. Mr. President, whatever the gentleman in the Soviet seat may say in reply is most probably useless. We need to hear directly from the mastermind of the war crimes committed so far. As we established that he was out of loop on many occasions, having no clue what was going on the ground. We know quite well that the manic obsession with which Putin fantasizes about non-existent biological or chemical weapons or hazards in Ukraine is very dangerous. It may actually point at Russia preparing another horrific false flag operation. So what else are you going to use against Ukraine? Cruise missiles, multiple rocket launchers, heavy aerial bombs? We have already experienced all of this. What is next? Ammonia, phosphorus? And what will be the next target? One more residential building? One more maternity hospital? One more school? Or maybe one more cultural heritage site? Russian troops have already hit all these sites, all of them. By calling this meeting, the aggressor state has shot itself in foot once again. Ukraine runs a health system that is totally in full compliance with its international obligations and in full cooperation with all relevant international organizations. The rest is a bunch of insane delirium of Putin and his henchmen, including the Russian mission to the United Nations. Russia does not give a monkeys about safety of its own citizens, including thousands of decomposing bodies of Russian soldiers sent by Putin to Ukraine to this ongoing carnage. I regret that the Security Council is being now manipulated by the Russian Federation to promote such an insane delirium. It is an utmost disregard by the Russian Federation of the members of the Security Council. Finally, it is detrimental for the Council's credibility. What indeed has to be addressed by the Council are the war crimes and crimes against humanity that the Russian Federation commits on a daily basis since 24th of February, the day when the war in Europe, unleashed by Russia, started. Among the most recent examples that shocked the world, Russian airstrike that destroyed the maternity hospital that we already mentioned so many times today. Russian indiscriminate shellings and airstrikes have almost destroyed Mariupol, one of the most beautiful cities on the Azov Sea, and killed 1,582 civilian residents of that city, according to the local administration. For the first time since the World War II, people are being buried in mass graves in Ukrainian cities. I would like to use this opportunity to ask the gentleman in the Soviet seat, if you are really connected, wired to Moscow, please talk to Moscow to release the kidnapped mayor of the city of Melitopol. Please help us get him back from the arms of the invaders. Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Izium, Akhtirka, Volnovakha, and many other Ukrainian cities are being razed to the ground. Documents and maps seized by the Ukrainian troops from Russian prisoners of war confirm that bombardments of residential areas had been planned in advance. Captured Russian pilots at today's press conference in Kiev have reconfirmed that they deliberately dropped the bombs on residential areas. The number of civilians killed by the Russian troops exceeds military losses. Many people have lost their homes. More than 1.5 million left Ukraine, almost 2 million by now, across the western border. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, became IDPs. Only from Kharkiv, 600,000 people were evacuated by trains. The main efforts are now focused on ensuring safe passage of civilians through humanitarian corridors. Unfortunately, the arrangements are often violated by the Russian troops. Awful pictures and footages taken near the destroyed bridge in Irpin with killed civilians, including entire families who tried to flee the occupied areas, have circled and horrified the globe. Russia must not use civilians as hostages in human shield. By exposing cities to indiscriminate shelling and creating a dire humanitarian situation, deliberately shelling civilians during the evacuation from the besieged Ukrainian cities, Russia is forcing civilians to flee their homes and providing only a corridor to its territory or to Belarus. So-called green corridors proposed by the aggressor for sending people to Russia and Belarus could be considered as forcible deportation of protected persons according to international humanitarian law. Mr. President, Ukrainian people are being killed and Ukrainian cities are being destroyed as we are compelled to listen to the Russian absurd fakes in the Security Council. Fakes created in a desperate attempt to whitewash the war against Ukraine. Russian aggression threatens us all, and there is an urgent need to be resolute in countering uncivilized, barbaric, and mean actions by Russia. The sooner the aggressor is stopped and held accountable for his crimes, the safer our world will be. I will not end before I read several paragraphs from an open letter from 194 Nobel laureates. I quote, "The undersigned Nobel laureates voice our support for the Ukrainian people and the free and independent state of Ukraine as it faces Russian aggression." 194 Nobel laureates. In a move that recalls the infamous attack of Nazi Germany on Poland in 1939, using similar tricks of feigned provocation, the government of the Russian Federation, led by President Putin, has launched an unprovoked military aggression, nothing else but a war against its neighbor, Ukraine. We choose our wars carefully here, for we do not believe the Russian people have a role in this aggression. We join in condemning these military actions and President Putin's essential denial of the legitimacy of Ukraine's existence. We respect the calm and the strength of the Ukrainian people. We are with you. Our hearts go out to the families and friends of all Ukrainians and Russians who have died and been injured already. May peace come to this piece of our beautiful world. End of quote. I thank you.
أشكر ممثل أوكرانيا على بيانه.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement.
لم يعد هناك أي أسماء مدرجة على قائمة المتحدثين.
On my list.
رفعت الجلسة.
The meeting is adjourned.
Go ahead, sir.
come out here.
Just quickly, you've heard what just went on in the council, and I just want to say we believe in truth, we believe in facts, we believe our eyes and our ears. We actually believe what you are reporting every single day. We believe independent media. We believe the world is bearing witness to a war of Russian aggression, and no matter how much Russia tries, it can't change that. That's what today showed, and it continues to show that Russia is the aggressor here, no one else. Thank you.